October 18th, 2014. Willow Creek, Kansas. The wind came in low that morning, dragging dust across the empty square, like it had nowhere better to go. Half the storefronts along Main Street were boarded up. The old feed store had a faded sign hanging loose on one chain, tapping against the wall with a hollow, tired rhythm. Even the church bell hadn't rung in weeks. By 9 o'clock, a small crowd had gathered near the courthouse steps. Not because they wanted to, but because word had spread that the bank was sending someone. And when the black sedan rolled in clean enough to reflect the gray sky above, everyone knew exactly what it meant. Daniel Reeves stepped out in a pressed suit that didn't belong to this place. Shoes too polished for dirt roads. A man who had never had to fix something with his own hands. He didn't waste time. "I'll keep this simple," he said, his voice carrying just enough to make sure everyone heard it. Willow Creek is no longer a viable investment. A few people shifted. No one spoke. The bank will be calling in all remaining outstanding loans within 30 days. Properties that cannot meet obligations will be reclaimed. There it was. Clean. Final. A town declared dead by a man who had been there less than 2 minutes. Near the edge of the crowd, leaning against an old Ford pickup, with rust bleeding through its blue paint, stood Eli Turner. He didn't move, didn't react. Watched. If you didn't know him, you might have thought he wasn't listening. That was how Eli had always been. Quiet in a way that made people underestimate him. Hands rough from years in the soil. Jacket older than most of the buildings still standing. But his eyes were fixed on the banker, and after a moment, he pushed himself off the truck. The gravel crunched under his boots as he stepped forward. "Give us one more season." It wasn't loud, but it carried. Reeves turned almost surprised that anyone had spoken at all. "I'm sorry." Eli stopped a few feet away, close enough now that the difference between them felt sharper. City and soil numbers and calluses. "One more season," Eli said again. "You shut this place down now. You don't just take land, you take the chance to prove it ain't finished." A murmur ran through the crowd. Not agreement. Not quite. Just the sound of people who hadn't heard anyone push back in a long time. Reeves gave a small, polite smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Turner," Mr. Turner Reeves said, clasping his hands in front of him. "This town has been declining for over a decade. Population down 40%. Agricultural output reduced to a fraction of its peak. There is no demand here." He glanced around as if the empty buildings were evidence enough. "You're asking for time," he continued. "But time requires a reason. And from where I'm standing, there isn't one." A few people looked down. Someone coughed. Eli didn't. "You ever try to sell anything here?" Eli asked. The question hung there longer than it should have. Reeves let out a short breath, half laugh, half disbelief. "That's not how this works." "No," Eli said, calm as ever. "That's exactly how it works." That was when the tone shifted. Reeves straightened slightly, his patience thinning just enough to show. "With respect," he said. Though there was very little of it in his voice, "You're a farmer. I deal in markets projections, capital flow. I don't need to try selling to understand when something has no value." A few people in the crowd nodded, not because they agreed, but because it sounded official. "Certain." Eli tilted his head a fraction. Or maybe he said, "You just ain't looking at the right buyers." That did it. Reeves actually laughed, this time louder, turning slightly so the others could share in it. "There are no buyers," he said. "That's the point." He gestured toward Eli's truck. "That thing you're leaning on probably costs more to keep running than anything you grow could ever sell for." A couple of men chuckled, uneasy but willing. "And you think a Saturday stand is going to fix that?" Reeves added. "You think a few tomatoes on a folding table will reverse 10 years of economic decline?" Well, he shook his head, smiling now, not kindly. "This isn't a story, Mr. Turner. It's a balance sheet." There it was. Outdated Everything Eli had spent his life being told, laid out in front of everyone. For a moment, no one spoke. Eli's face didn't change. Not a flicker. Not a trace of anger or embarrassment. but something settled in his posture. Something quiet and solid. "You give me 4 Saturdays," he said. Reeves blinked. 4. Eli repeated. "If I can't prove there's money still in this ground, you take whatever you want." A pause. "And if you can?" Reeves asked, amused. Eli met his eyes. "Then you don't call this town dead again." The wind picked up, carrying dust between them like a line drawn in the dirt. Reeves considered it for a second. Not seriously, just long enough to enjoy the absurdity. Then he nodded. 4 Saturdays, he said. "I'll even come back and watch." More laughter. Louder this time, as if they were all witnessing something inevitable, as if they already knew how it would end. But there was something none of them understood yet. And if you stopped the story right there, you might think this was about pride, about a stubborn farmer refusing to accept reality. But it wasn't. It was about something much older than that. And to understand why Eli Turner stood there so calmly while a banker dismissed his entire town, you have to go back a long way. Back to a time when Willow Creek wasn't quiet. Back to when Saturday mornings meant something. Eli grew up in a house that smelled like soil and iron. His grandfather built it in 1948, just outside town, when the land was still considered some of the richest in the county. Back then, Willow Creek had 3 feed stores, 2 grain elevators, and a market that stretched from the courthouse steps all the way down to the rail tracks. People didn't just farm here. They traded. They gathered. They knew each other's names. Eli's father, Samuel Turner, ran a produce stand at the center of that market. Not the biggest, not the flashiest. Just a wooden table, worn smooth at the edges with crates stacked neat and honest. Samuel didn't believe in shouting prices or dressing things up. Let the food speak, he used to say. And it did. Tomatoes that still smelled like sun. Corn so fresh it snapped when you bent it. Beans, squash, apples, everything grown within a few miles. Everything carried in by hands that understood exactly what it took to get it there. Eli spent his Saturdays under that table more often than behind it. Too young to sell, old enough to watch. He watched how his father weighed produce without a scale, sometimes just by feel. Watched how he remembered who liked what, who needed a little extra, who couldn't pay that week. But always came back. It wasn't just selling, it was knowing, and that was something Eli never forgot. But time has a way of changing things that feel permanent. In the late 1990s, the first supermarket opened 20 miles out. Big, bright, full of options that didn't care about seasons or distance. At first it didn't matter. People still came to the market, until they didn't. One by one, the stands disappeared. Farmers sold their land. Some moved. Some just stopped. Samuel Turner didn't stop. Not right away. He kept setting up that same table every Saturday, even when there were more empty spaces than full ones. Even when customers grew fewer, quieter. Even when Eli, older, now started to understand what was happening. "Maybe we should sell somewhere else," Eli said once late one afternoon, as they packed up unsold crates. Samuel wiped his hands on a cloth and looked out at the empty square. "This place ain't done," he said. But his voice carried something different that day. Not doubt, something closer to waiting. He held on for 3 more years. Then, one winter after a season that barely covered the cost of seed, Samuel Turner folded the table for the last time. He didn't make a speech, didn't mark the moment. He just set the wood against the wall in the barn and left it there. Eli found it months later buried behind old tools and broken parts, dust-covered, forgotten, but not broken. That was the thing about the Turners. They didn't throw things away. Not tools, not land, not ideas. Eli didn't leave Willow Creek like the others did. He stayed, worked odd jobs at first, helped neighbors who were still holding on. Fixed engines, repaired fences, did whatever kept him close to the soil. And slowly, piece by piece, he built something small. A few acres of land no one else wanted. Seeds his father had saved in jars, labeled in faded ink. And that old Ford pickup, bought cheap, fixed over time, turned into something more than it looked. Most people saw a man stuck in the past, but that wasn't quite right. Eli wasn't holding on to what had been. He was waiting for the moment it might matter again. And here's the part nobody in that crowd understood that morning when the banker laughed. Eli hadn't just been growing crops. He had been watching, learning, testing things in ways no one noticed. Different planting cycles. Old seed varieties that handled the soil better than the commercial ones. Ways of preserving flavor that didn't survive shipping, but thrived locally. He wasn't farming for volume. He was farming for something else, something harder to measure. And while the town shrank, while the market disappeared, while people like Daniel Reeves looked at numbers and saw decline, Eli Turner was quietly building an answer to a question nobody else was asking. But even that wasn't the real story, because what happened next wasn't just about what Eli knew. It was about what he had been preparing for all along. And the first Saturday would prove whether any of it mattered at all. The first Saturday came colder than expected. Not the kind of cold that bites, but the kind that settles into empty spaces. The kind that makes a place feel quieter than it already is. Eli Turner was there before sunrise. The square looked no different than it had the week before. Same cracked pavement. Same empty storefronts staring back like they'd given up watching. Same silence. But there was one thing new. In the middle of the square, Eli had set up a table, not a folding plastic one, not something bought last minute. It was wood, worn smooth at the edges, solid in a way that didn't exist anymore. His father's table. He had taken it out of the barn 2 nights earlier, cleaned it, sanded it just enough to bring the grain back, left the marks that mattered. By the time the sun broke over the buildings, the table was covered, not with much, but with intention. Tomatoes. Deep red. Uneven in shape, nothing like the perfect circles in supermarkets. Corn still wrapped in green husks. Jars of pickled beans. Honey in glass bottles that caught the morning light. Everything arranged carefully, not to impress, to mean something. Around 8:30, the first car passed through the square. Didn't stop. By 9, 2 more. Still nothing. Eli didn't move. He stood behind the table, hands resting lightly on the wood eyes on the street, like he was waiting for something that hadn't arrived yet. And just before 10, the black sedan returned. Daniel Reeves stepped out again, this time slower, taking in the scene like it was exactly what he expected, which in a way it was. Well, he said, walking closer, glancing over the table. This is quaint. Eli didn't respond. Reeves picked up a tomato, turning it in his hand. No labeling, no pricing strategy, no branding, he said. You're not even trying to compete. It ain't competition, Eli said quietly. Reeves smirked. Of course it isn't. A couple of townspeople had gathered at a distance, not to buy, just to watch. One of them, Tom Harlan, who used to run the hardware store before it closed, leaned toward another man and whispered, "Told you." The air carried that word across the square. Told you. Reeves set the tomato back down. You've got 3 more Saturdays after this, he said. I'd suggest reconsidering your approach. Then he turned, already done with it, already certain. But there was something he didn't notice. A pickup truck older than Eli's had pulled up at the far end of the street. It stayed there for a full minute before the engine cut. The driver stepped out. Not from around here. You could tell by the way he looked around, not with familiarity, but with interest. He walked slowly toward the table, hands in his coat pockets, eyes scanning everything. Eli didn't greet him, didn't pitch, didn't explain. The man stopped in front of the table. He picked up a tomato, held it close, noticed the smell. That was the first thing. Then he pressed lightly, testing the skin. Where'd you grow this? He asked. Eli nodded toward the edge of town. Same soil as always. The man gave a small smile. Doesn't taste like always. He reached into his wallet. I'll take all of them. The few people watching shifted. Tom Harlan frowned. All of them. He muttered. Eli didn't react outwardly. Just started packing, carefully, like it was already pet. And that was the moment something changed. Not in the crowd, not in the town, but in the direction of the story, because that man wasn't just passing through. And what he did after leaving that square would begin something no one, not even Eli, could fully control. By noon, Eli's table was empty, not crowded, not busy, just emptied. One buyer, one quiet transaction. Reeves had already left. He didn't see it. Didn't see the truck drive away with crates stacked in the back. Didn't see the way Eli stood there afterward, not celebrating, just thinking. And if you had asked anyone in Willow Creek what happened that first Saturday, they would have told you nothing changed, but they would have been wrong. Because sometimes, change doesn't start loud. Sometimes it starts with a single person who knows exactly what he's looking at, and more importantly, what it's worth. The second Saturday didn't look much different. Same table, same square, same quiet. But this time, Eli arrived with more. Not more variety, more volume. Crates stacked beneath the table. Extra jars lined up along the back. Corn bundled tighter cleaner. Prepared, as if the first Saturday had confirmed something. Around 9, the same black sedan appeared again. Reeves stepped out, already shaking his head. "I assume last week didn't go as planned," he said, walking over. Eli kept arranging his produce. "You assume a lot," he replied. Reeves exhaled through his nose, amused. "Let me guess. A couple of pity purchases. Friends trying to help." He looked around the empty square. Still no customers. Eli didn't answer, because at that exact moment, another vehicle pulled in. Not the same truck. This one was newer. Clean. Out-of-town plates. Then another. And another. 3 cars in less than 5 minutes. That hadn't happened here in years. The first driver stepped out well-dressed, but not like Reeves. Less polished. More practical. He walked straight to the table. "You Eli Turner?" he asked. Eli nodded. "I'm looking for the tomatoes from last week." Reeves, standing just a few feet away, went still. The man continued. "Chef Alvarez sent me." That name didn't mean anything to most people in Willow Creek, but it should have, because 30 miles away in a city that hadn't thought about this town in a decade, that name carried weight, and Eli knew it. He didn't smile, didn't react much at all, just said, "Got more today." The man looked over the table, then behind it. "All of it, all of it." A pause. Then the man nodded. "I'll take everything you've got." Behind him, the other drivers were already getting out. Waiting, watching. Reeves stepped closer now, unable to ignore it. "What is this?" he asked. No one answered him, because something was happening. And it wasn't his kind of transaction. This wasn't paperwork. This wasn't projections. This was demand. Real, immediate, undeniable. By 11, the table was empty again. Faster this time. More money exchanged. More crates loaded. More quiet conversations between people who understood something the rest of the town didn't yet. Reeves stood there longer than he meant to, watching, calculating, trying to fit what he was seeing into the numbers he trusted. But it didn't quite fit. And that was the beginning of his problem, because what he didn't know, what no one in that square knew yet, was that Eli Turner had never been trying to sell to Willow Creek. Not really. That town was just the ground. The story was happening somewhere else, and by the third Saturday, it would be impossible to ignore. By the third Saturday, the town couldn't pretend anymore. It started before sunrise, not with silence this time, but with headlights. 1, then 2. Then a slow line of vehicles rolling into Willow Creek, like something had finally remembered the place existed. Eli was already there, same as always. Same table, same posture, same quiet way of setting things in place, like nothing had changed. But everything had. He had doubled his harvest again, not recklessly, not beyond what the land could carry, just enough, because Eli Turner didn't grow more than he could stand behind. By 7:30, the square was no longer empty. People stood in small clusters, some from town, some not. The difference was easy to see. The locals kept their hands in their pockets, watched from a distance. The outsiders walked straight to the table. By 8, the first line formed. No sign, no announcement, no advertisement. Just word. And that was something Willow Creek hadn't had in years. Word that meant something. Daniel Reeves arrived 10 minutes later. He didn't park right away this time. He slowed the car as he turned onto Main Street. And for the first time since he'd come to town, he hesitated, because what he saw didn't match the story he had already decided was true. Cars lined along the road. People standing. Talking. Waiting. He stepped out slowly. This time he didn't speak first. He walked toward the square, eyes moving from one detail to another, trying to understand where this had come from. A woman carrying a crate passed him. "Excuse me," he said. "What's going on here?" She didn't stop walking. "Market," she said. like it was obvious, like it had always been there. Reeves turned towards the center, and there it was. Eli's table, no bigger, no fancier, but surrounded. 3 people deep at the front, more behind them. Conversations happening, money exchanging hands, crates moving faster than they could be replaced. Reeves stood at the edge of it all, invisible, for the first time in his life, watching, listening, trying to find the flaw, trying to locate the temporary spike, the anomaly. The reason this would collapse, but there wasn't one, because this wasn't sudden. It only looked that way. Eli caught sight of him, but didn't stop working, didn't acknowledge him, didn't need to. A man at the front of the line spoke up. "You got more of those yellow heirloom tomatoes?" he asked. "Back crate," Eli said. "Take what you need. No price negotiation, no sales pitch, just trust." And people responded to it. That was the part Reeves didn't understand. This wasn't efficient, it wasn't optimized, and yet it was working. More than working, it was growing. By 10 o'clock, the square was louder than it had been in 15 years. Not noise, life. Tom Harlan stood at the edge again. But this time, he wasn't shaking his head. He was watching differently, calculating something of his own, because just across from Eli's table, someone had set up a second stand. Not much. Just a jar. But it hadn't been there last week, and that was how it started. Not with Eli alone, but with Eli first. By noon, everything was gone again. But the crowd didn't leave right away. They lingered, talked, looked around the empty storefronts, differently, as if they were seeing possibilities instead of endings. Reeves stayed longer than anyone, until the last crate was loaded, until the last customer drove off, until it was just him and Eli. The wind came back softer this time, not dragging dust, just moving through space that didn't feel quite so empty anymore. Reeves stepped forward. "What are you doing?" he asked, not mocking this time. Not amused. Eli wiped his hand slowly. "Selling." Reeves shook his head. "No. Not this," he said, gesturing around. "This scale, this demand, this isn't local." Eli nodded once. It never was. A long silence followed, and in that silence, something shifted. For the first time, Daniel Reeves wasn't talking like a man explaining something. He was talking like a man trying to understand. "You set this up," he said, "before I got here." Eli didn't answer right away. "Then, I planted it," he said. "Tut." Reeves frowned. "That's not what I meant." "I know." And that was all Eli gave him. Because the truth wasn't something you explained in one sentence. It was something you built, over years, without anyone noticing. And now it was visible. There was one Saturday. One. And for the first time, Reeves wasn't sure what would happen. The 4th Saturday didn't begin in Willow Creek. It began 30 miles away, in a restaurant kitchen, where a man in a white coat sliced into a tomato and paused. Chef Alvarez had built his reputation on consistency, precision, control. But this wasn't controlled. It was something else. Flavor that didn't travel well. Texture that couldn't survive shipping. Something that only existed, close to where it was grown. He set the knife down. "Where did you get this?" he asked. His assistant didn't hesitate. "Small town." "Willow Creek." Alvarez nodded slowly. "Call the others." Back in Willow Creek, Eli didn't know any of this. Not exactly. He knew enough to prepare. That morning he arrived earlier than ever, and for the first time, he brought everything. Every crate, every jar, every bushel he had. Not because he was gambling, because he knew. By 8, the road was full. Not just cars, trucks, vans, even a small refrigerated vehicle. People stepped out dressed differently this time. Not just buyers, professionals, people who understood value when they saw it. The square filled faster than it ever had. Not just with customers, with energy, with expectation. And at exactly 9:15, a black sedan pulled in. Reeves stepped out. But this time, no one looked at him. No one waited for him. He walked forward anyway, through the crowd, past conversations he wasn't part of, until he reached the center and stopped, because what he saw, he couldn't deny anymore. Eli wasn't just selling out. He was negotiating, quietly, directly. standing across from a man in a tailored coat discussing quantities, delivery schedules, future supply, not loudly, not for show, just clearly. And then it happened. The moment everything turned from doubt to fact. A contract, not a handshake, not a maybe. A contract placed on the table, signed, right there. Reeves watched it happen, watched Eli take the pen, sign his name, watched the man across from him do the same. And just like that, the numbers changed. Not projected, not estimated, real. Enough to cover every outstanding loan tied to Eli Turner. Enough to prove something far bigger than that. Reeves stepped forward. How much, he asked. Eli looked at him. Didn't hesitate. Enough. Reeves exhaled slowly. The kind of breath a man takes when he realizes he got it wrong. Not slightly. Completely. The crowd shifted again. But this time not toward doubt. Toward something else. Recognition. Because they had all been there that first morning. They had all heard the word dead. And now they were watching it come back to life. Right in front of them. Not because of investment. Not because of outside rescue. Because one man refused to believe what he was told. By noon, the square was louder than it had ever been. Not just with buyers. With laughter. With plans. With people talking about next week. And the week after that. Things that hadn't been said in years. Reeves stood there until the end. Not as a banker. Just as a man. Standing in a place he didn't understand when he arrived. And barely understood now. When the crowd finally thinned, he approached Eli one last time. I was wrong, he said. No defense, no justification, just the truth. Eli nodded once. Yeah, he said. But there was no bitterness in it. No satisfaction either, sure. Either. Just acknowledgement. Because this was never about proving someone wrong. It was about proving something right. Weeks later, Willow Creek didn't look the same. The feed store reopened first. Then the hardware shop, Tom Harlan behind the counter, again slower now, but steady. More stands appeared in the square every Saturday. Eggs, cheese, bread. Thing people had stopped making. Started again. Not because Eli told them to, because they saw it was possible. The bank didn't pull the loans. In fact, they offered new ones. But not the kind that came with speeches, the kind that came quietly, because this time, they were following something real. Daniel Reeves wasn't assigned to Willow Creek anymore. Some said he requested the transfer. Some said it wasn't his choice. But before he left, he came back one last time, not in a suit, just to see it, to understand it, if that was still possible. He found Eli where he always was, behind the same table, same posture, same quiet way of being. You could have scaled this, Reeves said. Expanded. Turned it into something bigger. Eli adjusted a crate. It's already big enough. Reeves nodded. He didn't argue, because now he understood something he hadn't before. Growth didn't always mean bigger. Sometimes it meant deeper. As the sun dropped behind the buildings, casting long shadows across a square that was no longer empty, Eli stood there, hands on. The same one his father had used. The same one people once thought had no place left in the world. And if you asked him what changed, he wouldn't talk about contracts, or chefs, or buyers from the city. He'd probably just say, this place was never dead. And maybe that was the truth of it, not just for Willow Creek, but for a lot of things people give up on too early. Because the truth is, most things don't die because they lose value. They die because people stop believing they have any. And sometimes, all it takes is one man to stand there quietly and prove everyone wrong.